It's not enough. We need more. Just there must be more of us. Okay, so this is the Montana Writers reading. There's 6 of us. We're each going to read for 10 minutes. Yeah, I'll get started. This is my... Yes, I'm wearing the same shirt I wore yesterday. I've learned a few things about organizing a festival. One of them is that I need to pack better than I did. So this is the first few pages of a book that I'm working on called The Education of Little Man False Star Boy. My sister and my nephew are back there too, FYI. That summer was the summer I got the only claim check. Hold on. Oh. Start over here. I know if I don't time myself, then I'll end up going 25 minutes over instead of 20 minutes over. That summer was the summer I got the only claim check of my life, and along with many others who got the same, spent my own small piece of the Sweetgrass Hills, and that is the sort of thing you can't forget once you've done it and know what it is you've done. That was the summer my Uncle Con, stone sober and believing wholly in the power of Christ since at least 72, told me stories, some of them old stories, the ones first spoken in a language neither one of us knew in any real way, but nonetheless had a respect and reverence for that likely exceeded all other forms. And that was the summer Laurie Johnson, who had one of the loudest voices I have ever heard, the kind of voice that calls to you at strange moments from the past, caught June's man, Caesar Badstrike, fucking Alana Morris in his truck well after midnight, right across the street from Laurie's house. Oh, his truck was just rocking. You could hear those shocks squeaking. That was how she said it. Her eyes just big like saucers, her voice even louder than usual when she would tell the story later on to any poor fucker who would listen. And the way she told it, oh, she pretended it was an awful story to tell her best friend's man cheating like that with Alana, who everybody knew opened her legs for anyone who gave the slightest effort or got her drunk or both. The burden of it all. It was a tremendous weight, but there is always some survivor tasked with bringing to the people the story of what happened in the battle. Somehow, though, in a town whose internal mechanism feeds on the blood of gossip, only a few of us knew Caesar had chippied off and on with Alana since the previous winter, when June had gone home early, too much BV too quick, from the New Year's Eve party Lisa Lastdog held at her grandpa's house. The two of them, Caesar and Alana, walked out the door in that way you do when you're going with somewhere with someone to fuck. I had the sudden sense that every single thing meant something, but that the meaning was always just beyond us, and that we would live and die that way, a bunch of stupid fuckers. It was a big thought for a young man of 17, so I went to the kitchen and took another shot of Fireball, and soon enough the night began to spread itself out like the most tremendous deflated balloon. There was something about her even when she was young. Not a woman or a young woman yet, but still mostly a girl. There was something about her that made men, older men, I noticed them. When we were still almost kids, I saw them turn their heads toward her, and at first this made me feel strange. I couldn't understand what I was feeling at all, but I had the sense of something large approaching, like one of those dreams with a looming presence like a shadow, but the thing that casts the shadow never appears. She changed when they looked at her, and the more they looked at her, the more she changed. She was like light run through the jewels of their eyes, and what she was on the other side was something new. And later when we were older, I wanted her to change for me, and the way she changed for me, the way she changed for the boyfriends who approached her and fell away like cannon fodder, and even still for the older men, though for them she changed so as to get something. She was almost mean to them. She batted them around and told me stories about laughing at them, even making some of them cry, which made her feel disgusted. Watching them cry like little fucking bitches was how she said it. But when she told me about them, she would laugh with deep amusement, in that way someone does when they don't care about the things they are amused about, laughing almost like I wasn't there. But of course she would not have laughed as hard or as long if I weren't. And then there was the other June, the second June, the one we joked around with and cruised Maine with and had been drunk as fuck with many times since that first time in 8th grade out to the pavilion. me and June and a few others, one of them Josh Big Bear, who I have not seen for a long time. That first time drunk out behind the pavilion, stumbling around and laughing in the shadow of that tremendous steel-sided building, which had not been used since long before we were born, its huge doors pulled permanently open, gaping like a black doorway into another part of life. Me and June standing there at a kind of proscenium whose boundary was marked by light, taking turns shouting into the darkness of the unlit building's massiveness, sharp slats of light breaking through in the places where sections of steel siding had been ripped from the frame by the wind. The bottle of Christian Brothers, which we had found half full out in the field that afternoon, passed back and forth between us like a sacrament, our voices booming back to us from the far, dark end of the empty building like spirits calling, calling. This was the same June who got her first expulsion our freshman year for fighting Dale Hawk in math hall, leaving skinny-ass Dale to spend the rest of his life thinking about what she'd done and for us to tease him about it. And then later expelled again junior year for beating the holy hell out of Marissa Holter for trying to get with Caesar, who by then had been with June since her 8th grade year when he was already 17, and a junior champion bull rider whose name was beginning to mean something in the rodeo circuits of the West. And this was the same June who, during our senior year, wore a perfume that gave you a sense of being enshrouded in a dark warmth, of being caught in a heavy, languid summer night that wrapped itself around you and left you half asleep and endangered. The check had been an idea for so long that when it came time for me, when I turned 18 near the end of our senior year, I was surprised I had to do anything at all. At that time, talk of claim check money was as common as elemental things. Water and air. People joked about being claim check rich and then later laughed about being claim check broke. People bought claim check cars, got claim check drunk, and a few even got claim check married. A sedan in need of a wash, trailing Rainier cans by a string tied around the bumper, those big words drawn loopingly across a tinted back window. On the day of my birthday, I asked Big Man how I was supposed to get the money. Big Man is his grandpa who raised him. I asked Big Man how I was supposed to get the money, and he said, I don't know, maybe I already spent it. I can't really remember. He knew that I knew he had not spent it, but he wanted to see my face when he said it. So I gave him the face, and he laughed at me. He had already got the check because the woman who ran the finance office, I cannot remember her name. I think she was a morning sun. She was a big, friendly woman who was always flirting with Big Man, which I could never understand because there he was, just an old man who had raised me and had been generous with me, taught me to be respectful, and had a few times raised his voice when I was not, moments which I can still remember. But now that he has been gone for many years, I can see that my grandpa had been a handsome man who carried himself with dignity and had conducted himself in relation to others, whether Indian or white or otherwise, with a supreme sort of confidence that bordered on indifference. He did not care what you thought about his life or what he did with it, and often enough he did not care what you did with your own, unless you were fucking up so terribly he would finally lose patience with your dumbassery, at which point he would offer a few choice words that you could never forget, that would resurrect themselves in your head off and on for the remainder of your life, regardless of what you wanted, the way true things always do. And in that way, he was fearless with his words and his life. He was always teasing the women who worked in the tribal offices, and I saw them and how they looked at him when he did, and their faces were drawn not without affection or something more. He was profoundly Blackfeet in ways that I cannot say he understood or even that I understand. I can only look at him and see that he was the way only Blackfeet have ever been, without quite knowing we are that way. As someone who has spent the entirety of their life in France, would be profoundly French in ways they could not identify or say. And when I finally lost him, I knew that some piece of myself I had taken for granted, had not even been able to see it was so essential to how I thought of myself, had fragmented and been tossed into the great emptiness around us, and that I would be forever less than I had been. But later I came to see that you could not finally be a real person without such loss, and that any attempt to remain whole was not just futile, but a lesser motion against the true and largest motion of life, which is endless loss among the shining temporaries of this world. After he had handed me the check, I stared at it. I didn't know what I should do with it. I must have looked like a stupid cow. And that was likely why he laughed at me again. I asked him how he got it. All he said was, "See how lucky you are, it was me who raised you." That's it for me. Okay, stop. Chris Latreille is up next. Chris is Little Shell. He lives in Missoula. He's the author of One Sentence Journal, descended from a travel-worn satchel, and of the forthcoming book, Becoming Little Shell. Everybody welcome Chris.
Bonjour, friends. Is that loud? You know, I left my house early this morning knowing I was going to be in town all day, and I packed a wardrobe change, kind of like Madonna, for the event, and I was fully prepared except for my shoes. So I had to wear my sandals, and I thought, you know, at any given time in Missoula, there's like 5,000 dudes in pants and sandals. I thought I could let it slide and no one would even notice. And then like 20 minutes ago, my brother, my Ojibwe brother, who I haven't seen in probably 4 years, David Treuer, tonight's headlining act, my Ojibwe brother comes down, we hug it out, we catch up on what we're doing, where we're going, what we've been up to, and then he says, "So, flip-flops for your own reading, huh?" So no Indian Fest would be complete without the requisite lateral violence. So thank you, Mr. Treuer. I'm proud of my bare feet. So one of the stories about James Welch, and I know this isn't the event for telling stories about him, but it is relevant for what I am choosing to read tonight, is that, you know, he would go into schools, as many of us do for the Missoula Writing Collaborative. And I tell the story about my good friend Mark Gibbons, who is our current Montana Poet Laureate, who, when he was in high school in Alberton, Montana, which for those of you who don't know is a tiny little town, you know, 30 miles or so west of Missoula, Jim Welch came to his class and was so inspiring to him as a small town Montana white dude student that he decided he wanted to be a poet too. So obviously that worked out. He's published, 9 or 10 books of poetry. He's our poet laureate. But it speaks to the impact that James Welch had on people in ways that maybe we don't think about. And through the Writing Collaborative, you know, I've done it the last couple of years. And I make a point when I was asked to do it that I wanted to do it on the reservations. So that, and I am very clear that I am Little Shell, I'm Anishinaabe, I'm Métis, I'm all these things, and I have a high school diploma, and I want them to know. I'm already getting emotional, I haven't even started reading yet. I want them to know that you can do that. You can take the path I've taken and still do work that is art and creative, and you don't have to follow paths that everybody is telling you you must do in order to succeed. And I think that is part of the legacy, you know, that James Welch left to my friend Mark, who shared it with me, so that when the chance for me comes to be in the Writing Collaborative, I can feel like I can be part of that energy that makes us all more united than it is to keep us apart. So I get opportunities to read my own garbage all the time. So I chose to go through the last couple of years of the writings of the students that I've worked with and read some of their poems. And I think these are almost exclusively fourth graders, except for one exception, which I will point out when I get to that. So we're going to start out with Max. I am made of marker ink on my shirt, paint on my face, and rubber parts of eraser in my hair. Here's Jacoby. I saw myself, it was last year. I was at home and I was outside. My brother and I were sledding. We seen 3 cops driving around. The cops I knew were in the cop cars. They were tribal police, and then they turned on their lights. They went to this house and arrested 2 people. It scared me. My brother and me went sledding for 10 more minutes, then we went home. We played video games for a while, then we watched a movie. forest. Depressed, don't feel blessed, feeling stressed, teardrop down my eye, my, how time flies. Here's Marie. Camping reminds me of swimming, sweet s'mores and the marshmallow goo dripping down my face, sleeping on an air mattress and breathing in the fresh country air. Seth. Lego, 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 Lego. I want to be Lego man. Lego, 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 Lego. Blake, fourth grader. I am grateful I have a grandma. She does a lot for me. If I did not have her, I would probably have been a bad kid. But she has taught me how to be a good kid, and that made me the man I am today. This is Fred, who I remember all he wanted to talk about was hunting. And I should point out that these aren't all native kids either. But, we're kind of all in different situations that make us similar when we're living shoulder to shoulder on the reservation. I believe that the souls of the dead animals still lie in the back of my truck. That's a fourth grader. This one, Emma, I don't even remember what the prompt idea is. So what I would usually do is there'd be some kind of a prompt idea, but I would say choose not to do anything related to what the prompt is. And I don't remember what the prompt was, but somehow in my bloviating, as one must occasionally do with fourth graders to kind of keep them going, I told an abbreviated version of one of our Anishinaabe creation stories as to why we call it Turtle Island, for example. And it was a really quick and dirty version of it. And then out of the blue, she made her own creation story, unprompted, of how bread was made, ladybug and cockroach. Ladybug was sent from the above to steal something from the down below because Ladybug was fierce, strong, and super quick. She flew down and couldn't see anything but this big old cockroach that was dirty and mean, and he said, "I'll eat you if you don't make me something to eat delicious." But Ladybug said, "Not unless you let me ride on your back." So then Ladybug saw all these materials and started to cook. She made a batter and put it in the oven. It was ready, and Cockroach tried it and said, "Add more of that flour." And she made another batch, and Cockroach said, "Add more of that powder and wheat." And Ladybug baked it, and the Cockroach tried it and said, "Delicious," and ate half of it, and then left the other half. So Ladybug grabbed her materials and left. Everyone in the above land loved it and shared every bite. This is Shayna. What I think, what people think. That's the title. Most of these don't have titles. I am not liked by some, but I am nice to others. I look like I am fat and ugly, but people say I am just right as a prom queen. I look like mud that dries up and breaks, but others say you're pretty. I look like sand, but others say I have pretty smooth skin. I look like a pig that is dirty, but others say I look like a pretty rainbow parrot that has a nice voice. This is Annabelle. This is what's called an acrostic poem, where you take the first letter of a word and you make a line out of each of those letters. And sometimes that letter can be the first word of the sentence, or it can live somewhere in the middle of a word. It's pretty much however you want to do it. She chose to use the first letter to make the first line of each letter. And the word she chose was cat. So her acrostic cat poem is "Crying at the Party." And doesn't that just hit you with a ton of bricks? And we talked about that. What does that mean? Because we immediately associate, like, oh, why is this poor girl crying? Why is she sad? I mean, almost universally, everybody reacted to it with what happened? But maybe something awesome happened, right? Maybe instead of crying because the people she wanted there weren't there, maybe she was crying because they were, right? Maybe she was crying because she was so full of joy that she got a birthday cake with like 6 inches of frosting and like 2 inches of cake to support all of that frosting. So that was one of the things that we talked about, is why do we immediately react negatively or heartbreakingly? Well, hearts can break for joy too, right? So we had a good discussion over crying at the party. And that's just a wonderful poem for a 60-year-old to write, let alone a 10-year-old. This is Ray from Dixon, who Ray just graduated 8th grade. Who do we do this for? I've been looking into my dreams that will probably never come true, but I do pray that they do. Most of my life I've been struggling. I try every day to be a good person, but it doesn't work out, I guess. I have to learn still how to be a good kid. I always been mommy's and daddy's nice little boy who was supposed to stay out of trouble. But I learned what life is now, and it ain't a funny game. Drugs and beer could ruin family members. Love and drugs don't mix. People kill themselves from the bullies at school. I mean, I'm just speaking facts. Sometimes I just sit in my room playing music and thinking in my mind what made me sick in my heart. I pray for better days to come. I pray that I will make it to my 60s or 70s. I pray I live a good life. Hopefully I make it to heaven when I die. Hopefully I can be a good writer and singer. That's my dream of living. That's what I want to be. I try to be a good kid and friend, but it never works. When I sleep sometimes, I could see my dreams fall out of my mind, and I can't do anything to get it back. I always say to everyone that I would take a bullet for someone to live and grow a happy life and stuff. I do mean a lot of stuff when I talk. Sometimes I wish everyone could get along instead of choosing sides. Choosing sides is tough because you don't even know who to go for. That's Ray, who just graduated 8th grade, Dixon, Montana. And I have one more for you. This is from Zillion, who was a very quiet boy. Didn't want to ever read his poems, didn't participate. He always participated as far as the writing is concerned, but he never wanted to share it. You know, I probably heard 5 words from him, even as, you know, you can just tell when someone is dialed in or not. And I didn't force anybody to talk if they didn't want to. So this poem, when he turned it in, was one of the most special ones that I've encountered. Little blade of grass, even though it's hard to be, you have found a way. If you are the pink one, don't worry about the rest. Just be the pink one. Welch for coming tonight. I'm always a mess when I have to do these things. And now I get to introduce my friend Heather Cahoon, whose horsefly dress I have in my hand. And my plan was to read her fancy bio that's in the back of the book, but you know, that's kind of informal. Heather and I have been fortunate to read together twice in the last year. We read at an event for the ZAC, and then most importantly, we read almost a year ago to the day at the grand opening for the Missoula Public Library, which these other events have been held at, which we know was recently voted the best library in the world. And I'm pretty sure it's because Heather and I gave it all that Indian energy when we read there a year ago. So we're going to take full credit for that. So my friend Heather, take to the stage.
Thank you, Chris. Those were amazing poems. So I just have 3 poems for you. The first one is called Nkwe. Why this repeated sunburst of feathered bodies, cliff swallow flocks erupt into a sky of lungs and throat, 1,000 dull brown wings frantically folding, releasing, diffusing light, refracting reason, centrifugal forces decentralize until the word is scrambled, is unrecognizable, uncomfortable to look at as this history of people, Skylihu, and place, Chiulehu, so difficult to understand and to believe. Nkwe means to believe. And this one is titled The Cheat Shat, and that means older sister in Salish. She is a wood warbler hatched into madness. She emerged from milky shell, earthen brown blotches, not Rorschach, not robin, but warbler. Open-mouthed swallow of hard, chipped notes, calls smothered inside her smoke-gray chamber of throat. Disappearing between branches, muted yellow-green tail feathers and body, dainty clawed toes, white lines half circle, her eyes sense but can't see. At the center of night movements, misfire, misreads the body, responds on its own. And the last one is called Meditations on Blue. Open as sky, as belief, my son's eyes as a child, before they shifted to earth-grounded hues of tufted hair grass, golden star moss, and devil's club leaves. 6 mountain bluebirds frozen in space but not time with the help of the wild wind. Against the blonde hillside, they appear as if, in a still life, as if I could walk up and pluck one from midair. Fireflies like blue-white micro-stars blink on-off near my father's house on Post Creek. Quickly, they disappear into the dark mouth of night. An emotion described as in she or he is feeling blue, an idiom incapable of posing the questions cried by those it depicts. If crisis truly carries opportunity, what of the recursive nature of loss? Where is the exit from ruin? Because Kwai, the word for blue, also describes my concepts of black and green, I attempt to reconcile these differing perspectives held captive in a word. In keen self-awareness of other, she, i.e. meaning, is the reckoning found inside irreconcilable, or the irreconcilable inside found reckoning. Whichever it is, she, i.e. meaning, sometimes enters the mind from the outside, overstepping the insoluble, the wood-planked borders between meanings, as if one word or idea was or is more or less active in the mouth, the mind, or in protest or pronoun, as if any idea can fit inside the carcass-like casket of label. I read that we categorize to create meaning, therefore it is possible to change meaning by recategorizing. Meaning hovers, a hummingbird moth, or is it the real thing? Which again is it, Trochilidae or Lehuni, the buzzing, long-beaked seeker of nectar that never seems to alight? Thank you. So next, I'm going to introduce my friend Adrienne Jawort, who is a Northern Cheyenne fiction writer and veteran journalist based in Billings, Montana. She is the author of Moonrise Falling and the editor of and contributor to Off the Path, Volumes 1 and 2. A two-spirit transgender woman, she is the political director of Indigenous Transilience. Adrienne.
Okay, I put a timer on, so. Okay, the story's called In the Shadow of Custer, and it refers to, I'm from Billings, but southeastern Montana, and if you travel around there, it's like all the towns, like if you're going towards Poplar, it's like the towns are called like Miles, Terry, Custer, and it's like Bearcoat Miles, General Terry, and of course Custer, but it's like everywhere is like named after Indian killers, including streets like I live by, same names and stuff. But anyways, this was a kind of a continuation of a different story I had. It was about this girl named Lydia who's gonna kill herself, but never did after getting basically having to go to jail right when she was in finals week of college, and she wanted to be a writer. And very sad girl, but that story really resonated with a lot of people, like with even like the white people, the white trash people. I want to say they just loved this character for some reason because she was just like working these shit jobs and just was so blunt and so real. It was so Montana, and they loved it anyway. So this is what she's doing a couple years later. I always wanted to revisit her. The Bakken oil field boom had gone bust for the time being, and 250 miles is the eagle flew from Poplar, an eastern Montana town in the heart of the Fort Peck, Assiniboine Sioux Indian Reservation. Indigenous people across North America, along with modern-day hippies with dreadlocks and even an occasional Hollywood environmental activists alike, protested a pipeline going through traditional Lakota land adjacent to the Standing Rock Sioux Indian Reservation. Billionaire oil men and laid-off roughnecks, however, hoped the contentious pipeline would get demand going again by lowering the prices for transport to compete with the pure and cheaper desert oil beneath the bloody sands of the Middle East. While the fate of the oil pipeline loomed in courts, oil fracking, after straining if not destroying local infrastructure, populaces, and environment, left intact the drug pipeline to the region as Poplar became a depot for a meth epidemic to seek its demon fangs into. I fucking told you not to have any in here, Lydia said to Melville, glancing sideways at the bedraggled woman next to him and the kid, 7 or 8 years old, who must have been her daughter, watching some canned Disney Channel sitcom on the living room TV. Well, it's cold out. That I have nowhere to go right now, Melva said nonchalantly. He was concentrating on firing up his little glass tube bloker, rolling it methodically to heat the product until it turned to bubbles before inhaling the swirling mist. Yeah, you're such a fucking humanitarian. Taking some Syrians while you're at it. Really, dude? Lydia said, glaring eyes motioning towards the kid. It's bad enough I told you not to have anyone home. Fuck. Never mind. Fuck you people. You're plumb rugged. No shame. Melville laughed as he blew out the puff of phosphorus-smelling chemical smoke he'd been holding. The woman in question held out her hand with her own lighter, ready to flick in anticipation of the sensational rush Melville was feeling that triggered her brain and pussy into a sustained minor orgasm. He said, "You people, you racists. Oh, fuck, man. I'm sorry. Not laughing at you. We shouldn't do that. Just forget she's even here. Sometimes she's too quiet." "Sure you did, dude. Ain't even that cold either." He laughed again, nervously this time, knowing he had no excuse, shaking his head in a don't-do-it manner at the woman with teeth beginning to decay, anorexic body, too short cut-off jeans, and red bra visible through her undershirt tank top. Lydia says she'd been ravishing once upon a time, based on how pretty her mini-me offspring looked with her olive skin and long brunette hair, rat's nest and all. Lydia could tell the woman wanted to pout as Melville put the pipe in the upper drawer, her body inadvertently twitching. Heck, just getting antied, he said. The little girl was staring intently at Lydia with a look conveying both curiosity and disgust. The big silver remote in her hand, she knew it was Lydia was there to do. Give Mommy her needle poison dose that made her not her no more. Lydia smiled and nodded, hoping to alleviate the discomforting recognition, but only got eyes wishing her death. Whatevs, can't fucking blame her, Lydia thought. When one is a little girl, time is measured by impatiently anticipating the next holiday as if those are the years. Lydia wondered what holidays were like for this one, recollecting her own childhood of checking an empty refrigerator for at least a third time in a long hour, with only the shallow beats of top 40 music playing from the alarm clock radio on the kitchen table, whose repetitive songs she grew to hate, hoping food would magically appear or Mom would take the hint. Lydia once wondered if she was on Santa's bad kid list, when she never got any presents, even after striving to get the best grades at kindergarten and doing all she could to help Mom out, which usually meant doing dishes and picking up beer cans and bottles from the night before in her ghetto trailer house, located on the south side of Montana's largest hub city, Billings. But Mom didn't want help no more. She only wanted to smoke cigarettes from the sad-colored light bulb at the kitchen table all the time, sometimes going to the bathroom for a doctor shot. When they asked the kids at school what they got for Christmas, Lydia lied and said Barbie doll. But even though she didn't know anything about them, hoping no one would ask which one, because then her bluff would be apparent. And it didn't matter if she lied, because Santa thought she was a bad kid anyway. When another kid from her neighborhood didn't lie and said he got nothing, Lydia felt a sense of being with him, as maybe Santa just missed her trailer park. Then the boy angrily said Santa wasn't real anyway. His brother told him so, and only stupid kids believed it. He cussed. It was the first time she'd heard of a kid her age say a bad word in real life with such conviction. But the curse poignantly let it be known he was right. Valentine's Day would come next. Lydia would have no cards to give to other kids. She always wondered if anyone could ever heart her. The poor kid with no friends who was teased for having mismatched socks, disheveled hair she tried to comb on her own, a drunken drug and Indian mom, as she'd heard a popular kid say, and dirty t-shirts she sometimes washed in a tub with dollar store shampoo. While other kids were congratulated for how big they were getting, Lydia's feet hurt from her worn-down shoes a size too small. At Easter time, Lydia stared in amazement at the bright plastic baskets plumb full of candy in the grocery store aisle, but she wouldn't get to have none in her plastic bag until that Saturday's free candy hunt in the park. Her stomach growled, the bright, fake green grass making the egg-shaped candy bars all the more enticing. Knowing Jesus wouldn't forgive her sin anyway because she was too embarrassed to go to the church by her house when all the other girls would look pretty in their new dresses, she slipped one in her pocket. She left the store, a tear falling as she made her way to safety, remembering the day the FBI policeman took Daddy away. The 4th of July was always fun when Daddy was there, with fireworks and a barbecue and everything, but without him, Mom always sold all the food stamps. Lydia resented her most for that. The colorful lit skyline sparkled, scents of gunpowder and other people's barbecues filled her nostrils, and she could hear the parting as big people drank boxes and boxes of beer, as other kids drank Walmart soda and ate hot dogs. Lydia drank from a garden hose, her grandma from a clear plastic smelly bottle all the time. Grandma always never woke up, even when they shook her hard, and she slept outside downtown a lot when police and ambulances eventually picked her up. A few weeks later, Grandma went to the hospital. Her face got fat and she turned yellow, so they made her sleep on the ground. Mom's friend Renee took her to the second-hand store to get clothes before school that time after Grandma died. And she told her Mom probably wasn't going to make it much longer like Grandma. Lydia asked if that meant if she could still have the food stamp card if Mom was not going to be much longer. She promised she'd even buy healthy food. Renee hugged her, cried, called her a poor dear, and took her to a restaurant where the food was good. She even got her ice cream and a bowl dessert. Still, she wished she would have gone to McDonald's where they had the ice cream cones. That's where Daddy always took me, Lydia proudly explained. They even have a playground inside, you know? The Heights one does. Halloween was her favorite holiday. A pillowcase plumb full of free candy. She didn't even need any costumes. Just awkward questions about who she was supposed to be. I'm a ghost kid, she said. She grew to detest the Thanksgiving holiday season and all the stupid songs they made her sing about pilgrims and Indians at school. She uncomfortably felt the white kids viewing her with sideways glances. She even got in trouble for not participating. "I'm too old for those songs," she said when they asked her why she wouldn't. Still upset about her birthday, everyone ignored a few weeks earlier, she said, "I'm not a baby anymore. I'm 7 years old, for fuck's sake." The bad word got her in more trouble, but she was done with participating at school anyway and didn't mind the tension. One day, right before Turkey Day, a white lady called the social worker took Lydia away from Mom. She moved in with white people in a big house who brought her brand new clothes this time, but they made her go to church with its annoying songs. And then she was glad she stole that candy bar and cussed. She had lists of chores and rules everywhere in the house, or they did, even on the bathroom mirror. And an older, whiny son and daughter who constantly asked why Lydia had to be there with them. "Lydia isn't as blessed as we are," was the general answer. Although Indian was a language she didn't understand, one that Mom only spoke on the phone and when drinking with friends, her foster siblings know that's all she was. "She's just some Indian kid we had to take care of," they'd tell her friends, rolling their eyes as if Lydia wasn't standing there right there looking upwards at them. "I don't want Mom and Dad have to do everything for those people, but my dad, he is white," Lydia said proudly. "Whatever," the mean son said. "Heard he's in prison too, for selling meth, probably to your mom." The sister said, "So when are you going to go back to the reservation already?" "Meth, baby." They all laughed. Lydia was hurt. It was no small feat to make her fail, but she missed her daddy terribly and constantly wished he would come rescue her. It was the only thing she prayed for at church, but her prayers weren't answered by God, but by her foster mom, who said she wouldn't see Daddy for a long time because he was in a prison in Colorado. Lydia collected herself. "I'm not a meth baby," she said defiantly, taking a step towards his sister and looking her in the eyes. "Fuck you." It was the second time she ever cussed. Watching the girl's snobby white face turn ashen made Lydia celebrate inside, but she kept her own face steely. The children debated on whether to tell on her for cussing, but Lydia said something she'd heard another actual Indian reservation kid say. "Go ahead, Dan, cry." The children decided against telling, as they might get in trouble too. Lydia never went back to any reservation to where she'd never been, but she did eventually go to Mom's new little apartment in a basement alley with no yard, along with a new school with even less Indian kids, but at least she was close to the library. So she spent most days reading books because the few TV channels they had on sucked, and Mom hogged a DVD player. Lemony Snicket books were her favorite. She didn't know where the reservation even was then, but as she grew older, she always thought maybe those kids were right. That's where she belonged. She barely had any friends at junior high school beyond casual acquaintances in class and occasional res girls she'd cling to, who, like her, often struggled to fit in as they tried to change the way they talked before going back home to where they'd be accepted. Mom did pay more attention to her this time, even if it was mostly to chastise, to which Lydia would roll her eyes, making her more pissed. The river between them was permanent, the banks only eroding as the years went on. Lydia ruined her life, Mom would always tell her, especially when her drinking picked up again. She could have been something, but she wasted her life away, raising the always unappreciative Lydia, the one whose heart pumped in different red blood, seemingly neither white nor Indian enough. Okay. So my next one is Mandy Smoker, ML Smoker. Must be from the Fort Peck Res, which made me leery of reading that story, but they're the poet laureate. What more can I say? Or were for like 2 years. So here we go.
Ooh, that's bright. You know, I think this is just such a tremendous festival. So many of us owe Jim Welch a lot for inspiring us, for creating a path. When I came here to U of M for the writing program, it quickly became known that I was like a super fan. And I remember after gathering for a reading one night, one of my professors, grabbed me by the hand and took me over to meet him. And I was like, shaking and just couldn't believe that he was there. We talked for a few minutes, and then, you move on. And then another professor came, and before I could say anything, was dragging me by the arm back over to meet him again. And he was very gracious. We just repeated the whole exchange. But, something that could have been embarrassing, he was, as always, so gracious about. This is a poem that I wrote for him that's in my collection, my first collection. It's called Cross Current, for James Welch. The first harvest of wheat in flatlands along the milk startled me into thoughts of you and this place we both remember and also forget as home. Maybe it was the familiarity, or maybe it was my own need to ask if you have ever regretted leaving. What bends? What gives? And have you ever missed this wind? It has now grown warm with late summer, but soon it will be as dangerous as the bobcat stalking calves and pets just south of the river. Men take out their dogs, a case of beer, and wait in their pickups for dawn for a chance with their rifles. They don't understand that she isn't going to make any mistakes. With winter, my need for an answer grows more desperate, and there are only 4 roads out. One is the same cat hunters drive with mannish glory and return along, gun still, oil shined and unshot. Another goes deeper into Assiniboine territory. This is the one I should talk myself into taking next. I haven't much traveled the third except to visit a hospital where, after the first time, my mother refused chemotherapy. And the last road, you know as well as I do, past the coral-painted Catholic church, its doors long ago sealed shut to the mouth of Mission Canyon, then south just a ways to where the Rockies cut open and forgive. There, you and I are on the ascent. After that, the arrival is what matters most. What am I going to do here? Okay. I am not Blackfeet, but I thought I'd read a semi-Blackfeet poem for Sterling since he keeps asking us. I've been really fortunate to travel around the state and work in many different reservation communities, and this one's very special to me. Heart Butte, Montana. The unsympathetic wind, how she has evaded me for years now, leaving a guileless shell and no way to navigate. Once, when I stood on a plateau of earth, just at the moment before the dangerous jutting peaks converged upon the sway of grasslands, I almost found a way back. There, the sky, quite possibly all the elements, caused the rock and soil and vegetation to congregate. Their prayer was not new and so faint I could hardly discern. Simple remembrances like a tiny syncopated chorus calling everyone home across 1,000 eastward miles. And what little wind was left at my back, I could not move, and then the music was gone. All that was left were the springtime faces of mountains gazing down, their last patches of snow, luminous. I dreamed of becoming snowmelt, gliding down the slope of history and into the valley, with the promise and assurance that there is always a way to become bird, tree, water again. Just 2 more here. This is called Equilibrium, in memory of Eric Levi Bigleggins. 1. After child after child after child, no one believes in the cacophony of sirens anymore. If only we could break back these bones and form a new ceremony from each of our losses. Oh, mend our teeth from another dark stretch of road, our rugged knuckles from another first of the month. 2. And still the children keep jumping from trains. The people in town dream anxiously, fire and iron licking at the corners of old handmade quilts. They have forgotten the language of antelope and crickbed, find in its place only one way to say, we are not responsible. Today, one man woke to the callous offering of a bird's beak and black wing left on his doorstep at daybreak. And what of all the other warnings of all the family lost because their hearts were too heavy for them to carry? If we could put these omens away down in the basement, the door could be locked, the mutter of crows left there to decay. 3. Next time, and it will be the dance of chairs and imaginary high-speed chases. It will require a fine sense of balance and a song of stars. Just the slightest slip of the rope and the sky will be set loose, the body like a shift in the river's current. 4. The bridge can hold, the body cannot, and our excuses will do nothing to save us now. We survive between these barbed wire fabrications. We gather together in the middle of the night, call out the names of lost cousins and friends who cannot cross over to the other side because we keep praying them back. We ask so much of them. Slow the car down, don't jump, don't let go, come back to us. But what are we really guilty of? The blood memory of what we cannot forgive ourselves for. 5. Hollowed out grief becomes electric, loosens 1,000 storm patterns in the marrow of ghost homes, ghost children, ghost love. Last one, this is for my son Desmond. It's called We Are the Ones. Waiting, a syllable forming, generating energy in small, dark masses, marrow, stem cell, neuron, waiting to come alive again in this tiny body. Guwa, you should learn this word between you and I, my son, Hokshina. Come here, come home to this place, between you and I, no separation, but always room and silence until we can find meaning and the words together. I repeat it again and again, gesturing for you to come over, hoping the vibrations will come alive. You will listen inside yourself, and you will sense just who you are, who you belong to and among. As if you were underwater and could feel your pulse, the whir and swish of your blood traveling miles and miles across the wind-blown graves of your great-grandparents and their grandparents, Mikushi, Mitugash, yours, and they are out there belonging to you before you were even born. And I have the great honor to, I'm the lucky one. I get to introduce Victor Charlot, our esteemed elder of the Salish and Kootenai tribes. Vic was born in Evero, Montana, just down the road. He is a direct descendant of Chief Victor Charlot, the Salish leader who refused to sign the Hellgate Treaty of 1859. He has 2 collections of poems published in 2008 and 2017 by Many Voices Press. Please welcome Vic.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm 84 and a half now. And I was just a kid when I first started doing this. And I'm still doing it. I know Jim, and I've got a poem that he listened to one time. I think he was doing Upward Bound then. It was a long time ago. I think it was the second time he was, well, anyway, he was a poet then, and he was just a really young poet then, and I was struggling, and I wrote this poem, and it was just a really long, long poem. It went on and on and on, and said this and said that and said this, and then somebody said, you know, those first 4 lines are the best ones. And Jim was at Upward Bound that year, and he was there, and the poem is called Bad Wine. You can love a dying Indian, but when he drinks bad wine and breaks your best glass, you give him to the wind. That's a 4-liner. So, one of the things that's happened to me is this book. When the light of the world was subdued, our songs came through. I know there's other people who are in this, but I was really happy to be in it because it's edited by Jo Harjo, and she is our first Native American poet laureate in the United States, the first one ever. And she published me. I got in her book, and I'm really happy. So I thought I would, and one of the things that's going on with that book, or with that, is that there's a new building on campus, and it's for Native Americans, and I'm in it. Well, I'm not in it. I'm going to be forever in it, because what they're doing is that this poem that I've got is it's going to be in stained glass, and it's going to be in the university. And here's the poem. It's really difficult to read here, but I'll give my best. It's called Frog Creek Circle, and it's for my family, especially Jan. Mountain so close, we are relative, creek so cold, it brings winter rain. We return to warm August home, Frog Creek, where I've lived so long that smells are stored open only here. This land never changes, always whole, always the way we want it to be. We always come back to check our senses or to remember dreams. We are remembered today in circles of family, of red pine, of old-time chiefs, of forgotten horses that thunder dark stars. These are songs that we come to this day. These are songs that we come to this day, soft as Indian mint, strange as this sky. And there's one I can't, I had to do it. It's Dick Hugo, a letter. I wrote, he wrote letter poems. And so I wrote a letter poem, and Jim is in this also. It's Letter to Hugo from Dixon. Dear Dick, I was happy when you came to class this summer because I think of you now and borrow time from another time. To tell you of my truth warps my tongue, yet I can't say the truth and be silent. I never did tell you the truth. I could have asked you, friend, how you used to write that way as we drank your gin and orange juice on those dark, lonesome days. I certainly wasn't your poet, but I was, drunk Indian. Another friend showed your poetry written that I wrote in a seminary, stuff I wasn't proud of, but that girl made me feel chaste. We met. You said it wasn't good, awful, I remember. It comes back to me now, yet I had something in that poem. Was that the right words about my brother on Iwo Jima? You said you didn't say this to old ladies who would never write good poetry. I was your Indian poet those times, yet the only good line I wrote those times that made you laugh hard was Garfield's ghost swims the Skelcoho, and that poem soured fast too after that sweet beginning. After we went to Eastern Oregon College, you said the people, what were their names, would probably print it at the Mad Virgin Press, would probably print it. Yes, I said, but I remained virgin. As evening grew longer, we would change to whiskey and something like gin and orange juice. I mixed my drinks at the end. I remember leaning hard on the booze, pouring long on a half-gallon jug, then a splash of 7-Up. I was a sneaky Indian. On good nights, we would have those readings off the wall from that beautiful Eddy Avenue house across from the Bizad, Rocky, Logan, Kaiser, Stafford, good jazz that made you feel young and it would make you sing your heart out. We didn't know Welch yet. I was his poet, or we see his name and his reading was fine this summer. Bassett is here reading, helping me remember these times, poetry from good nights, and Dick, you were hot. I visit you very soon. Love, Dick. So, I think, boy, I'm just murdering these poems. It's been a long time. So, the last one, and I got it marked. This is the first polar bear, and it's for Chuck Jonkel, but it's really for all of us who live here and die here. This is our place. First polar bear. Oh, polar bear for Chuck Jonkel. Years of waiting become centered north as you leave warm reservation to travel unknown trails, guided by knowing you are the center of the universe wherever you are. You try to walk with all beings, knowing you do your best to do what is right. Your feet are light as song, walking bear song that urges you on to country of your ancestors, the Cree and the Chippewa, and walking bear comes finally home. Was it ancient scratches on glacier polished rock that told you that your ancestors were waiting? Was it the high wind that the geese ride north, or the owl who sang the great snowy, the owl that by the door at the old Dixon Agency? You want to paint your face a color mixed with red granite and Hudson's Bay water as a sign that you take your place at council fire with bear to talk of relatives, to share songs. You remember teacher singing whose walking bear was as you scratch your joy deep in smooth, hard stone, and walking bear comes finally home. Oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, 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 oh, oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, hey, way, oh, hey, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, way, oh, way, 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 oh. Lemlet.
Thank you, Vic. When we started putting this thing together, Vic was one of the people at the top of my list to come here and participate. We've got about 15, 20 minutes before we start the main evening event, so all of you can get up and move around a little bit and give us some money if you feel like at the donation table. And we'll be back. Everybody sit down, right where you are. I'm gonna have security remove these four guys right here in this front row. They're friends of mine, I don't want them here. They're the white guys that keep around me for protection. It's the only reason I hang out with them. All right. Only 10 minutes late. I feel like this isn't even Indian anymore. You don't, you don't know Indian until we're supposed to go into a sweat at 1 and it's 5 o'clock and you're still sitting there waiting for somebody's uncle to show up. He's in Conrad at the Keno machines. Good evening. I'm glad all of you are here. This is day 2 of the 73-day James Welch Festival. Rapidly, myself and the organizing committee and the volunteer staff are rapidly moving into 1,000-yard stare mode. I don't know why I did this. I made a terrible mistake. A couple quick things here before I introduce Dave Treuer. Once again, the way we're going to do the Q&A is there are cards back there on the info table. You're going to write down your profound and moving questions, such as, what is it like to be an Indian? I'm hoping every card says that, so the only questions Dave has. What is it like to be an Indian, Dave? And you're going to, for those of you who were not here last night, you're going to write your questions down on the cards at the info table, cards and pens back there. Try not to steal all of our pens. And then those cards are going to come to me, and I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to ask the questions to Dave, and that way, that way I save at least one of you the embarrassment of asking your question. Again, the donation table is back there also. We're taking donations for, last night it was for my trip to Arby's, but tonight I kind of feel like Arby's. And but the other 10% of the donations are going to go to future James Welch lit and then later on art festivals. We're also starting the James Welch reading series, which I'm hoping that the first one will be this late fall, maybe midwinter. And we are starting up the James Welch Native Comedy Night. And the only comedian that will ever be featured is me. That was one of my friends. So any donations that you give at this point are going toward setting up future festivals, which are obviously is an important thing. One other thing, Dave Treuer will be doing a book signing after his talk or his reading back there at the Fact and Fiction table. So that's where you go if you want to have him sign his book. Or somebody else's book. I don't know why. Why not? Do whatever you need to do. I don't know why people have to sign. I don't know why people have to sign their own books. Is this what it feels like to bomb? But you can't bomb when you think you're really funny, It's just other people don't get you. Let's see. I'm just going to go through Dave's bio here for a second. And I'm apologizing now. I'm not any good at introductions, Dave. So we'll see how this works out. David Treuer is the son of Robert Treuer, an Austrian Jew and Holocaust survivor, and Margaret Seeley Treuer, a tribal court judge. He grew up on the Leech Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota. After graduating from high school, he attended Princeton University, where he wrote 2 senior theses, one in anthropology and one in creative writing, and where he worked, and there he also worked with Toni Morrison, Paul Muldoon, and Joanna Scott. He graduated in 1992 and published his first novel, Little, which is being through Grey Wolf in 1995, and which will be reissued this fall. He received his PhD in anthropology and published his second novel, The Hiawatha, with Picador in 1999. Third novel, The Translation of Dr. Apelli. I'm almost certain I'm pronouncing that wrong. The first time I met Dave, I mentioned that book, and he's like, "You're saying that wrong." That was one of the first things Dave ever said to me in person. So, and so began a profound relationship. And third novel, The Translation of Dr. Apelli, which all of you should read, and a book of criticism, Native American fiction, a user's manual, which also all of you should read. it's a very important book because it discusses the idea of Native literature with a kind and the way that that is almost always tied into a particular idea about Indian identity with a clarity and a force that I have yet to see matched. Translation of Dr. Appelli was named the best book of the year by the Washington Post, Time Out, and City Pages. He published his first major work of nonfiction, Res Life, an Indian's Journey Through Reservation Life, in 2012. His next novel, Prudence, was published by Riverhead Books in 2015. His essays and stories have appeared in the New York Times, Granta, Harper's, Esquire, the Washington Post, Lucky Peach, the Los Angeles Times, and the Los Angeles Times, among other outlets. His most recent book, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the Present, was a New York Times bestseller, a National Book Award finalist, a Minnesota Book Prize winner, a California Book Prize winner, and was shortlisted for the Carnegie Medal and a Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist. He divides his time between his home and the Leech Lake Reservation in Los Angeles, where he is a professor of English at USC. I want to talk briefly about a particular aspect of Dave's work and what I think he is doing intellectually, which is particularly clear in his essays and is particularly important to the future of what I'll call native letters, although I think that is not as easy to define what we mean by that as we might think it is. There is his Harper's essay, Off the Land, which discusses the realities of trying to live off the land, to live a subsistence lifestyle, and the ways in which even those who are most able and interested in that kind of life are ultimately still tied into the modern economic system with the rest of us. There's The Fencing Master, which I believe he is reading from tonight, published in Granta, which tracks the early development of his writing life while he studied with two masters, the fencing teacher, Michel Sebastiani, and the great American fiction writer, Toni Morrison, in which yeah. It's a really great essay about the early part of a writer's life and what it takes to go from here to here. There's also the essay, The Fighters, which approaches the long history of violence in Indian country, particularly the violence directed at Indian men by non-Indians, and the violence that often exists among and between Indian men, told through the lens of a relative of his who has decided to become a cage fighter. I find this essay particularly moving, and I send it to everyone I can. And the response, almost always the response I get is, that is one hell of an essay. It's very powerful, and I highly recommend it. There's also his essay published in the Atlantic just over a year ago titled Return the National Parks to the Tribes, just in case, most important thing about that article is that the online version features, I'm in one of the photos, and that's right. It's only, I only pay attention to things about me. In this article in which he discusses the possible route toward what we might see as a modicum of reconciliation for the tremendous land theft that allowed for the creation of this country. There is his essay that came out, there's also his essay that came out in New York Times magazine this year, A Sadness I Can't Carry, which approaches Treuer's grief over the loss of his mother and the Ojibwe way of dealing with grief as a community. Most recently, there is Adrift Between Two Americas, in which he discusses the legacy of his parents, people with very different origin stories, and the ways in which those legacies have played out in him, the conflicts they have created in him, and the ways in which he has tried to reconcile them. And then just to return for a moment to his book, Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, which I think is a particularly important book. And since Louise set the tone last night for making large statements about books that should have won awards, that book should have won the National Book Award. But it's a book that traces that talks about what has happened in Indian country since the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. It takes us through the advent of tribal governments, or what we're calling modern tribal governments, termination, self-determination, and into what we now call, I don't know, whatever era we're in now in Indian country. And it's an incredibly important book, and I really believe that the reason it didn't win the award is because I don't think Americans really understand how to think about us, which is part of the purpose of this festival, and as a result, didn't understand the import of the book. Writing about Indians is so mired down in the imagination of non-native readers and writers, going back to Karl May, the German writer who published many books about Indians having never come to America. This is in the 19th century. It requires a special accuracy of effort from native writers to write with an undeniable honesty and aesthetic power that refuses to be ignored. And this is what I see in Treuer's work, a drive to portray Indian country. I still don't know what the right word is for this. I have a more honest light, but honest doesn't really do it. I think maybe accurate is it. A more accurate light without making a big deal that he is writing about Indians and Indian country. Because there is always the danger of pushing so hard against the powers that be that the work becomes performative and it becomes a strange game of red face where Indians are playing Indians for white people. The gap between what Americans want us to be and wallowing in the tale of the suffering noble savage is a narrow one. And like Jim Welch's work, Treuer's writing finds that opening, and in so doing shows the rest of us how we might do the same, whether that is through fiction or nonfiction. I'll end here. And I could go on about this in true Blackfeet style and try to turn this into something about myself, which I might do. What I see with Treuer's work is a writer and thinker finding a path that does not yet exist. And since we are, I'm going to continue to make grand statements here, but these are not untrue statements. I believe his work is the most intellectually significant Indian work since that of the original great Indian academic Vine Deloria. And this is in large part, because people who are not academics read his work. So much Indian writing has been trapped in academia for so long, and I really, it is in some ways has turned into another kind of reservation. And I want to use this festival in some way to get outside of that. And Dave's work is already doing that. So what he is doing, essay by essay, book by book, is building a way for the rest of us out of the trap of the American idea of the Indian, without sacrificing our truths and the realities of our lives in Indian country. It is my great privilege to introduce Dave Treuer tonight. Everybody give him a hand.
Thank you, Sterling, for that very long introduction. You're still saying it wrong. Never, ever publish a book when no one can pronounce the title of that book. They just don't. Because if they can't pronounce it, they're not going to buy it. And then, there you are. Thank you, though, Sterling, for real. And thank all of you for coming. I'm incredibly grateful. So happy to be here. I'm so happy that you're here. And I've been to this part of the country a few times, and I mentioned once to Sterling, I said, what's with you guys? Blackfeet, right? Like, you're so nice. It's weird. And he goes, oh yeah, no, see, we're nice to outsiders, but we're horrible to each other. So I have to take his word for that. But I'm actually uncharacteristically nervous. Usually performing has become no big deal, but I only really get nervous when I'm reading to family. And it's nerve-wracking, right? So there's the bad news. your family. So I apologize in advance. But it's really nice to see all of you out there. I have to tell a little story before I read the story I'm going to read you. My first novel was published when I was super young. I, of course, and no one really read it, to be perfectly honest. And when I was 24, right? And I thought, well, no one's reading it because the world's not ready for this book. But really now, I had the misfortune of rereading it recently, and I realized, no, the book really wasn't ready for the world. But there it is. But my very first reading was in Borders in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. I was pretty excited. I was nervous, my first public reading. And my mom came to the reading, which was pretty cool. My roommate came, and we walk in together. We showed up together, and there's no one there. I mean, there's nobody. It wasn't just like a few buddies. There was nobody there. And so the bookseller and the event organizer was getting pretty anxious, and she was feeling pretty bad. And but what are you going to do, right? It's Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, on a Thursday night in 1995, and this guy wanders through, there's a big stack of books about as tall as me, and this guy wanders through, and the bookseller said, "Hey, stop!" He's like, "Well, what's going on here?" Clearly drunk, and she said, "Well, we're having a reading. There's a first-time novelist. His name is David Treuer. It's going to be very exciting." And this dude, he's just like, he can barely stand. He's like, "Well, my old lady won't pick me up for another half hour, so fuck it." And then he passed out in the front row, which he had all to himself. So I read to my mom, and I read to him, and I read to my roommate. And it's only gotten better, so thank you for making it better. But I've been thinking a lot about mentorship recently. I don't know, at a certain stage in life, I guess. And, but also because I'm thinking about Jim, who I did not know, who passed away before I arrived anywhere, unfortunately. So I never got to meet him, but I've been thinking about him, and I've been thinking about the impact of his work on my life, and so thinking about mentorship. And so I want to read a piece I wrote a long time ago, and it's actually one of the first nonfiction pieces I ever wrote, and about finding mentors. So I'll just start. I've never read this out loud. I don't know how long it is. Sorry, Sterling ate up all of the good time. Thank you, Sterling. And so I'll edit it as I go for length as best I can. And this is, a piece about catching me in the act of being incredibly young. I walked into the salle and onto the piste on the B-level gym at Princeton University in the fall of 1998, ready to submit myself to the will of Maître Michel Sebastiani. Never mind, I didn't know the fencing room was properly referred to as a salle, and the 14-meter-long, 2-meter-wide fencing strip as the piste, or that Maître means master. I didn't know any of this, and it didn't fucking matter. I labored under a vow of greatness, and ignorance was just one more thing to overcome. I had decided previously in the spring of my senior year in high school to find something, and really it could have been anything, and dedicate myself to it, to sacrifice myself to it, and to become the best in the world. I chose fencing largely because I played Dungeons and Dragons, and I thought swords were really cool. But there was something so Princeton about fencing, too. Something aristocratic and clean, linear, definable, and white. Everything the Indian reservation I was from was not. I was determined to define my entire life by the rules that govern play on a 28-meter squared, woven copper fencing strip, and to concentrate all my time, all my energy, all my intelligence, and all my hopes on driving the quarter-inch tip of my foil into the target area on my opponent's lame. I I first met Sebastiani in the spring of '88 as a prospective student. I traveled all the way from Leech Lake to Minneapolis, from there to Newark, from Newark to Princeton, as a part of minority student hosting, which is what the meritocracy called the 5 days over which Princeton auditioned for us, rather than the other way around. The distance I had come was like a song I sung under my breath about myself as I was fed and toured and given pamphlets and a t-shirt and encouraged to be stunned by the bluestone sidewalks and the neo-Gothic dorms and the brilliance of the professors. The fencing room was large and spare. There were 8 metallic strips arranged in 2 rows of 4 with the scoring box set up off to the side, a tennis ball on a string and a large mirror on the far wall, a bench along the wall opposite. Near the door I entered was the maitre office, a small windowed room looking out over his domain. Everything in that office was in order. The neat institutional desk, the track jacket warming the chair back, a bouquet of foils and épées resting in the corner. Sebastiani was bustling around in that odd way of his I would come to know really well. He was perfectly bald on top with a fringe of severely short hair circling the back of his head. His face was sharp, thin, pointy nose, tight-set, close mouth, small eyes that poked out from underneath his sharp brows. He wasn't that tall, I don't think, but he had this powerful chest and these strong arms, like an old-fashioned strong man's torso, which tapered down to very neat, almost dainty feet. His eyes were severe, searching, as if his whole being were concentrated into a point about 3 or 4 feet in front of him, which it pretty much was. I introduced myself and told him I'd like to join the team, and this is where you get to hear my bad French accent, guys. So at least there's that, right? So he was so funny, but not intentionally funny. So you have fenced. Who has trained you? When he spoke, his voice didn't come from his throat as much from the center of his chest, his French accent like that of Inspector Clouseau. But the truth was, nobody had trained me. I'd never fenced before, not once in my life, and this was the preposterousness of my ambition. Everything about my life till that point carried the taint of mediocrity. Being native was part of it, being Jewish was the other part. Being both was absurd, honestly. Growing up on a reservation wasn't something that was even remotely interesting to me then. And frankly, by the time I was 17, I was exhausted. Everyone was, or so it seemed to me. Tired of fighting the government, tired of fighting the weather, tired of fighting one another, tired of fighting the flat tires, tired of sitting for 60 or 90 because of DUIs or old warrants, tired of the snow, tired of the fucking trees that oppressed us, growing so close as to block out the sun, tired of the noble qualities bestowed on us by the enlightened left, and equally tired of the beatings and cheatings and exclusion practiced by rednecks. Tired even of ourselves and our supposed virtue and nobility. Tired of the costume that poverty forced us to wear, tired of being expected to wear feathers, real or metaphorical. Tired of seeing ourselves in the movies where we were expected to do one of 2 things, die a noble death or provide the correct answer to the questions posed by white people. Tired also of everything meaning something else. I saw all this growing up in the stooped and weary Indian astride his horse in the velvet end of the trail painting in my grandmother's house. Pretty much every Indian I knew had that image on something. Velvet painting, polyester blanket used as a curtain, pillows, mugs, airbrushed onto their freaking cars. An Indian astride a horse, seen in profile against a setting sun, his spear pointed uselessly at the ground, his head heavy in defeat. But what I wanted was to mean the opposite of that. When you're not smart and not that self-aware, it doesn't occur to you that your desire to go forth from your home and do something special is about the most common thing you can possibly do. Sir, I said, I've never fenced before. But what do you want to do? Foil? Épée? Foil, I said, feeling very sure of my choice. He frowned. Are you athletic? Involved in sport? Well, no, not really. No, not at all, no. Do you run? No. Okay. Running is the best sport. It is perfect for fencing. So you never fence. No one has coached you. No, not once. He nodded gravely. Good, very good. American coaches, they know nothing. They know one trick or two tricks. They don't see. He made a full circle with both of his hands. They don't see the whole. They only see one thing or the other thing. They fill you with bad habits. But you come here, you come with no bad habits. You have no habits. Now, he really said this. And then he said the thing that hooked me. You have no habits, so I will train you to be a world champion. It is simple. Who can resist that, right? I walked out of the room, took the elevator up to the ground floor, and walked out of Jadwin, and it wasn't until I was in the center of campus, surrounded by the comings and goings of students and faculty, the leaves precepting on the chestnuts and oaks, that I woke up from his words and remembered where I was and found it in myself to smile. I don't know if should I skip the training montage? It's very long, but okay. All right, thank you. That's sweet. My training consisted of running, a lot of running. We ran for 45 minutes before practice. We ran shuttle sprints after practice. We were timed on the mile, the 800, the 400. Our results were recorded in a book that Sebastiani carried. He encouraged us to run in the morning before classes in addition to our practices in the afternoon. There was this unspoken but deeply felt understanding that if you didn't run in the morning, you weren't committed, so I ran in the mornings. Do not run like a machine, like a robot, he shouted as we gasped. To fence is to move in space, to control space, reach, jump, skip. And so I skipped and I jumped and I hopped. I did everything. My real practice began with drills that we ran by squad, my squad led by John Kissinger, who was the nephew of Henry Kissinger, by the way. From him, I began to learn the 8 different positions, 4 quadrants, 2 hand positions, supinated and pronated. At night, in front of books, I moved my hand from 2 to 4, from 8 to 6, and then I turned my hand over and worked on 1, 3, 5, and 7. I learned the difference between a lunge, a repost, parries, point and line. At times during practice, Sebastiani would call us out individually and drill us mercilessly. He closed distance and retreated, lunged and went back on guard, and we did as he commanded. He'd slap his thigh in frustration if we didn't get it right, and he'd mutter. This would go on for 4 or 5 minutes of sweat-drenched effort on my part before I occasionally got a word of encouragement, and I would collapse in exhausted gratitude at his feet. After 2 months of practice, we competed amongst ourselves for places on the team, and I made JV. Our first opponent was UPenn, and I was very happy. I really wanted to compete. But a week before the competition, a teammate accidentally broke his foil and drove the blade completely through my thigh. I've been stabbed, people. It doesn't hurt as much as you think. Blood coursed down my leg from someplace, and I didn't look too closely at the moment, very close to my groin. When I looked later, he'd punched all the way through my thigh and broke out of the surface on the backside right next to my testicle, but not through that. I got a tetanus shot. I went to bed. And I had to go to the clinic. They're like, what happened? I'm like, I got stabbed. They're like, fill out this form. And I thought, I'm used to this from IHS, but I'm not used to this from the Princeton Clinic. Shouldn't it be better than that? And I won, right? I didn't tell my teammates, I didn't tell anyone. I just didn't say anything because I wanted to compete, so I competed. And I won, and I felt pretty good about that. Didn't go home during fall break. Instead, I went to New York and saw the inside of smelly, dirty fencing clubs and managed not to see any of New York at all. And I got to travel all over Philly, State College, Annapolis, Cambridge. And I really didn't see anything of those places either, except the pixelated advancing and retreating forms of my opponents. I lost a lot. After Christmas, Sebastiani offered me a chance to take private lessons in the morning around 6:30, so I ran 2 miles, took my lesson, and then drilled footwork in lunges before breakfast. But it was during these times that I felt I really learned something. because he began instructing me on what I thought of as the deep art of fencing. It's not enough to work a move or two. One must fence on many levels at once. A level of first intention, a committed attack that you expect to fail. Even though you were totally committed to it, you're selling it. A second level, or as he put it, second intention, which is a calculated response to how you think your opponent will respond to your first move, and then to where the real game is. The third intention, your answer to your opponent's reaction to your first move. Fencing was chess. These verbal lessons were welcome breaks from the private tutorials, which left me quivering and dizzy. If I could get him talking, I could get a break, and so I would try to get him talking, and he did like to talk. He talked about himself quite a bit, about how his family was exiled from Algeria during the Civil War and moved from there to Corsica, how he joined the French Special Forces and was part of the military coup meant to restore the Pied Noir to Algerian soil. Not on the right side of history. Sebastiani was borderline racist, maybe not even borderline. He extolled all the virtues of dance, ballet, not what he called monkey dancing. He described torturing men that he fought in Algeria. They put a bomb in the lamppost, and it goes off, children die, so I see this. What is the pain of one man with my knife compared to all the pain of those children? He demonstrated with my shoe how to sever someone's spinal cord, how to flay their fingers. And I think I began to understand from him, at least a little, that a person can be flawed, but they can be beautiful too. I don't think I knew that before. Before, I only thought in absolutes. I was in love with fencing. I was in love with Sebastiani. I was, for the first time, close to being in love with my own life. Fencing had the kind of clarity that the rest of my life lacked. All the small moments, all the small victories, and the large, the frustrations and the disappointments were of a whole. There was pleasure there, and agony, much like love, maybe. And much like love, part of the pleasure and part of the agony was giving yourself over to the greatness, to the largeness of the enterprise. There were things to ponder. For instance, for the first year I fenced, I found in the neat lines of the sport everything I've been looking for but never found in real life. A very clear right way and wrong way. A set of moves that could be defined and practiced and perfected and which yielded consistent results. This was important to me in a life that was off the strip, as we say, becoming rather confusing. I mean, what did it mean, after all, being Indian? What should I do with my life? How come I hated and loved home in equal measure? Who to date? Who to love? How to be loved? What exactly was wrong with me? That there was something wrong was not in question. What I pondered as I lay in bed was that no matter how committed I was to the art, no matter how many lunges I executed or miles I ran or lessons I took or drills I completed, I was not met with, nor would I ever be met with complete success. Some opponents stymied me. I won a lot of the time, but I certainly didn't win all of the time. The season wound down in the spring. I emerged with a barely winning record. I stood 5'7". I have grown since then. My kids and I argue about this all the time. I weighed 174 pounds, having gained 2 inches in height and 30 pounds of muscle my freshman year of college. I returned home and worked on the reservation for what was known as the preservation crew. Funded by the tribe and the U.S. Forest Service, our job was to conduct cultural impact assessments before bridges could be replaced or land swapped or roads widened. It was archaeology. That's what it was called, but what we really did was dig in the dirt and smoke a lot of pot. I had no car, so I biked the 10 miles to Cass Lake at 6:30 in the morning, worked all day digging and chopping roots, biked home. In the evenings, I decided to take up Taekwondo. And in the late evenings, I spent time with my girlfriend Patty, also home from college. We watched movies, we talked, we made out. We'd been friends throughout high school, and there was a pleasing familiarity we had with one another, which felt a lot like how I thought married couples might feel. We knew each other's histories and sorrows. We were comfortable with one another. It was a good summer, but then two things happened. My best friend's father died while flying the ultralight airplane he'd been building in his garage my entire childhood. And Patty got pregnant. So life, which had before now followed the orderly rules of a fencing bout, kind of, sort of, proceeding in a regular fashion with the kinds of surprises that are all the more pleasurable because they're anticipated, that life disappeared and life became chaotic, discursive, wandering. The day after Dick died, I went to work. I unpacked my tools and began digging. And instead of puff, puff, pass, I just kept it. And I got massively stoned. And I began thinking about this man that I'd lost. He had been so kind to me, a father of sorts, patient, good-humored, gentle. And the more stoned I got, the less I remembered, until all I could remember was that he was dead and that I couldn't remember anything else about him. Not anything he'd done, not anything he'd said. The drug emptied my mind of everything except the fact that he was gone. Was this, I wondered, the way to treat someone who had always been so good to me? Was it right to erase what existence he had left as a memory, as a feeling, as whatever? If only in my own mind. I didn't know. I still don't know. But I quit smoking pot. I quit drinking too. Patty left for Ohio in August, and I left for Princeton around the same time. She called a month later, drunk, and told me she was pregnant. I don't remember much about the call. It was late. She'd woken me. I do remember that she was at a bar using a payphone. It was loud. I asked her what she wanted to do. I said, I'll be a father if that's what she wanted, following rather unexpectedly in my own father's footsteps, who had his first child at 18. We could keep it if she wanted, or we didn't have to if she didn't want to. And she said no, she'd already made an appointment. It would be gone in 3 days. I tried to console her, but I did not know how. There's nothing like being told you've helped conceive a baby to make you feel both like a man and like an absolute child. I was very small. Life was very big. And I did not know what to do. I continued to fence. I continued my morning runs, footwork, and lessons. I joined the judo club on top of everything else. I was as mindly physical as I could be, and it paid off, I guess, in a way. I made varsity. I was getting good at fencing, but perhaps not at being a good human being. Around the same time, and there might have been overlap, and I don't really remember. It's funny sort of how, what loss, I guess, does to your mind. Lots of it just leaves. It's blank spots. But around this time, I decided to apply to the creative writing program as a bet. Seriously. There was this guy in my hallway. I'll tell the story. I won't read from. I'll just have to tell you the story because it's funny. So this guy in my hallway, he was very proud of the fact that he was in the creative writing program. His name was Matt. Matt's cool. And he's like, well, you can't just take a creative writing class. You have to apply into the program. I said, wow, okay, you must be really good. I'd love to read one of your pieces. And so he showed me this thing. And I'm like, I can do that. He's like, well, writing, he goes, have you ever written a short story? I'm like, no, totally not. But I know I can do that. Child's play. He's like, I bet you can. I said, I bet I can. And so we made a bet. And I won. But I didn't win it first. No, and full disclosure, I wrote this really bad story. I wish I could, I think I found it, actually. I think I found it recently. I'm never going to share it with anybody. No. No. Absolutely not. Like, this story, I don't remember the plot, because I don't think there was a plot, but there was a guy who was a little bit like me, but maybe not. It's hard to say. I remember that this guy is walking. He's very sad, and it's autumn, as you'd expect. He's walking down a path, and there's leaves on the ground, and there's a certain angle of light, and I think that's all that happens. So it's a Sterling story, really. So I got rejected, right? It's terrible. And I tried again, also a bad story. I'm not gonna tell you the plot of that one, but I got in with that one. And I discovered that I had a natural ability to do okay in a creative writing workshop. Like, that's a low bar, but still, you know? Like, I could coast and do okay in an undergraduate creative writing workshop. Like, I was okay, it was good. Doesn't mean I wrote well, or that I could be considered a writer, but it felt good to be to feel maybe for the first time that I was a natural at something, that I had some basic ability on which I could at least coast for a little bit. Every other thing I'd ever tried was incredibly hard work. Around the same time, I took a course on European short fiction, Haussmann, Flaubert, Mann, Joyce, and they impressed me so much. They had championship games. That was Olympic level writing. And I was drawn to all of it. I was drawn to Tonio Kroger because I felt locked out of the inner circle of life generally. I was drawn to the dead because I had plenty of my own. And so I remember bursting into my workshop in the first creative writing class I took, and I was in kind of a lather, and I'm like, how do they do it? The instructor's like, slow down. Who's they? What's it? I said, well, you know, and I talked about the stuff I was reading. I talked about A Simple Heart. I talked about the dead. I talked about Tonio Kroger. I'm like, how do they do it? I mean, not to make my words do what their words did, but to do in my own idiom, to have that kind of effect on somebody. My professor palms out, slowing me down, calming me down, and I think I looked bonkers. He said, let's just focus on what we're doing here. Let's not compare ourselves to them. They're masters. I was very disappointed. I'm like, well, and I actually said out loud, I'm like, but what's the point then? Honestly. If we're not going for that, then what are we even doing here? I mean, if you're not trying to be that good, why the fuck bother? He didn't have an answer for that either. But it nagged. My question nags me. His answer nags me. I thought I should compare myself to them. I thought I should try to overcome, surpass. So I began to work harder, and in the spring of 1990, I applied for Professor Morrison's long fiction workshop. I don't know how many applied, but 6 of us got in. I have to say that there are days in one's life that are more or less like the one just passed and the one coming on the morrow. Most days are like this. Change, if it comes at all, is not sudden, typically. And then there are days that bring with them all sorts of surprises, and you say to yourself, this is it. It was on a day like this that I walked from 444 Witherspoon across campus to 185 Nassau to meet the great woman. There are times when Princeton can seem like a very pretty shell, a crust of excellence covering everything. A crust made of granite and marble and bricks and ivy and polo and topsiders and gardens and turf and the wisdom of oak trees, covering a yoke of callowness and privilege and shallow self-serving striving. This was not one of those days. There was a generous but kind version of sunlight dappling the gravel walk past Nassau Hall. It wasn't autumnal. There were no leaves under my feet. They were safely overhead. The flagstones in East Pine were level and secure, and I was freaking out as I walked to 185 Nassau. And I kept trying to say to myself, I'm here. I have a chance to do great things. I, who knew little, knew what Morrison represented, and I was so nervous. And I would say to myself, well, she's only a person, she's only a person, she's just a person, just a person with opinions. Everyone has an opinion, shit, you know? And then the other part of my mind's like, it's Toni fucking Morrison, man. It's Toni fucking Morrison, don't fuck this up. She's just a person, you know? She's right, she's wrong, she's got attitudes and ideas. She's Toni Morrison. And it was like that I'd sort of, these two voices, right, walking over. In the seminar room, I was surprised to notice that when Morrison sat in a circle and we were arranged in a circle, she somehow managed to be at the top of the circle. Where I come from, circles don't have tops. But she had this strange effect on space and time. And there are people, we've all met them, right, who seem to sort of bend both space and time. They have a certain gravity, and it's unavoidable. I know I don't have that. I know she has that. Black skirt, gray shawl sweater, thick beaded necklace, those famous dreadlocks. She organized us without having to say very much. I think we made small talk, but I don't remember it. And then she spoke in that voice. You all applied to this workshop because you're working on novels, she said. Her voice was all whiskey and cigarettes, but languid and precise. But that doesn't mean you are novelists. Hard to dispute. To begin, she said, let's go around and talk. I want to hear, and your classmates want to know, what you're working on. I don't remember what the first two students said. I was too nervous for any of it to sink in. And then the boy next to me spoke to my right. I didn't know him, but that did not stop me from not liking him. I remember his name. I'm not going to tell you his name. Because he's a good guy. He had the floppy hair of a natural-born Princetonian. Small eyes, small nose, thin lips. And he had what I thought of as Princeton hair, which he would just kind of flop. He just flop, you know. And he had this kind of reedy, Capote-esque voice. And he said, you'll see why I wasn't kindly disposed to this kid, right? I'm working on a novel that's set in Martha's Vineyard. And my protagonist is a half-breed Indian. His mother is the town drunk. The novel opens when, and the rest of it was lost to the rage boiling up inside me, right? Poor John. And it's my turn. Maybe, I said, trying to control my voice, maybe I should talk about why I write rather than what I'm writing. I write because I am Indian from the Leech Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota, and I write because people like that don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Well, no, it's not, no, this is not nice. This is not nice seminar behavior. Don't applaud me for that. You know, I mean, you know, as a deeply insecure person, the only right move ever felt like attacking, right? That was the only way I knew how to function in the world. And it's not healthy, it's not good, right? But anyway, so I said, they don't know what the fuck he's talking about. What they know is from Dances with Wolves, it's from Last of the Mohicans, it's from crap like that. That's why I write. I write because everyone else writes crap like that. You know, and we became friends, strangely, which says more about his generosity of spirit than mine. He's a good guy. And he was actually a good writer, too. Both. The class went quiet, though. Morrison looked at me levelly, And she had this manila folder, I have no idea what was in it, on her lap. It says here, she said, that you are an anthropology major. Yeah, so what? Well, you write better than most anthropologists. I'm just such an idiot. She's like, and then I said, that's supposed to be a compliment? That's so stupid, you know? And she just kind of snapped her eyes at me a little bit, you know? She's like, yeah, that actually is, it is a compliment. And then I finally woke up to where I was and to whom I was speaking, what was at risk in this moment. I'm like, okay, great, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And so we began, right? On one level, it was only a class, of course, and Princeton was full of classes with famous people teaching them. But even I, stupid, wounded, but innocent in the way that wild animals are, when they can't quite accept how they've been hurt, impatient, unknowing, even I knew or felt somehow that I was starting something else. In class, Morrison would make pronouncements. She directed this not at me, I didn't write this, but someone else did. Why do you write, quote, a smile spread across her face? She asked one student. I mean, where else is a smile gonna spread? On their elbow? Right here? What's wrong with being declarative? She smiled. Unless that smile is really important, don't inflect it unnecessarily. Also, she'd say things like, every novel begins with a question or a set of questions. Lead with that. If you make your reader wonder, why, who, then you have your reader invested. And these were, to me, also fencing terms. Sebastiani talked about investment. A reader doesn't approach a book empty, blank, unknowing. You must know what your readers know and use it against them to bring them to a new place, to a new understanding. And so I found that sort of all of my thinking about fencing was slowly was being reiterated in a different medium. The words that Sebastiani had said were being said by Morrison about a different thing, about a different sport or martial art. Every 2 weeks, I would meet with her individually. Our meetings were friendly, conversational. I got over my fear, and I liked her. I think she liked me. I never asked her, so I don't know. I know I amused her. I dragged her a lot, you know? I would tease her. And I think she was maybe tired of people being afraid of her all the time. And being teased was something that she liked to a point. To a point. I remember running up to her, she was walking, and I had to ask her a question. I ran up to her, I'm like, Tony, and she turns around, and it was like an action movie, because she had these aviator shades on, but they were like crooked, like someone had sat on them, right? And she looks at me, and she's very short, but she was up on a couple steps when I caught up with her, so she was very tall at that point. And she goes, what'd you say? I said, well, I called you Tony. She's like, yeah, no, I think I heard you correctly, but why did you say that? Because I like you? She's like, you know, the kid at the grocery store who bags my groceries, he calls me Tony. I'm like, cool. My dentist calls me Tony. How come it's so hard for people to call me Professor Morrison? Why is that so hard? I was like, oh, God. And to the day she died, I only called her Professor, right? In later years, I would visit her and I would bring her all her vices. Bad Chinese food, vodka, and cigarettes. And she would drink me under the table. I'm like, "Professor, I have to go." She's like, "I should let you get on with your day," is what I would say. And she's like, "What the hell else am I gonna do with my day? Stay." I'm like, fuck, wasted. She's not. I don't know how she did that, but she's like, Stalin would pretend to drink vodka at meetings. Maybe she was doing the same thing, I don't know. But we would have these conversations, and we'd meet every couple weeks. She made fewer pronouncements in her office, and she asked more questions. I was writing something about jack pine. She's like, "So wait, so these trees, they're called jack pine?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "So they can't produce new trees unless there's a forest fire?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's just how they work." She's like, "Oh man, you gotta use that. That's really good. That's awesome." She's like, "You do flora and fauna really well." That's hard, right? That's good. That's good. I was happy to get that attaboy, She would also say things like, "You have a tendency to write purple. You can always prune later, but this is a weakness. This is a serious weakness. You overwrite. It's florid. It's purple. So you can always pull back. You don't worry about it when you're writing, but pull back later." One time when we were discussing a draft of a chapter, she told me, "Effective writing is strategic. You want to bring your reader to a new place. They don't want to go there. You have to get them there against their will." And later, "You write like no one knows anything about Indians. They don't, of course, but they have lots of ideas about you. And those ideas get between them and your subject. Don't give in. Don't be ethnographic. Don't explain. This isn't a handicap. This is something you can use against people." I always emerged from her office committed to making the writing better. She pointed out weaknesses, and I would drill those just as I drilled my fencing. Too discursive? Too descriptive? I used a highlighter and highlighted all the adjectival words and clauses and sentences and rewrote the page without them, and then reintroduced them strategically, one by one. My tenses tended to drift all over the place. Past, past imperfect, past perfect, present. Morrison, again, "What's wrong with the past tense? It's quicker, it's simpler. Be simple when you can be simple. Save the fancy stuff for fancy places." So I drilled my tenses. "Watch out for received language," she would say. "This is dead language. Dead language was alive once, sayings, metaphors, similes, but it's been used so much, it's dead." When writing about race, dead language will make a dead book because it promotes dead ideas. So I searched out and destroyed as much of that as possible. "You write very well in your first drafts, but it feels kind of automatic," she said once. "You're not thinking about your words. You need to think about your words. Each word, each sentence should be a choice, but it shouldn't feel like a choice for the reader. For the reader, each sentence should feel like the only possible sentence that could go there." So I took the draft of my novel. This was after I graduated. I took the draft of my novel, bought some yellow legal pads like the ones she used, and copied the thing out longhand before typing it back into my computer, so I had to think about every word again. "The difference," she said, "between someone who writes and a writer is real. A real writer trusts their inspiration, but they edit. They approach what they've written as though they are a stranger to it. If you can't look at your own work with fresh eyes, with those of your readers meeting your book for the first time, you will never succeed. You might get lucky and write one book, and lightning might strike that book, but you will not have a career." So I practiced this. I read my work out loud to myself, and when my tongue tripped, I stopped and backed up and fixed the offending words. I had checklists that I used after each chapter, each scene. What does the reader know? What don't they know? What do they need to know? What do they need to know? When do they need to know it? How fast does this feel? How slow? She liked to talk about strategy. Writing race, in writing beyond it, changing our thinking about it, all of this requires strategy. The job of writing was the job of moving thought through space. She liked two things, I think, that she found in me. She liked sparring with people who weren't afraid of her, and she liked, I think, teaching the teachable. I'd like to think I offered both. I never asked her. Before I knew it, I'd fallen in love again. Writing was something I could do, and I found in Morrison what I found in Sebastiani, a competitor of the highest level, an artist for whom the art was a passion and a science, something to be felt and something to be studied. And I felt this deep down, and I felt it in my gut, whereas fencing was something I wanted, writing was something I needed. I was good at it. At least I thought I was. Really good. Not in terms of what I produced then, but I knew I could be. If I worked hard, if I studied, if I, as I had done with fencing, submitted myself to the greatness of the effort. I found first in fencing and later and more completely in writing the opposite of what I thought I would do at Princeton. I had come to Princeton to transform myself from something small into something big. This is a stupid idea. A better thing was to make myself small in front of a bigger thing, and to try and earn the right to enter it the way pilgrims will kneel before a church. I quit the fencing team. Sebastiani's disappointment was palpable. Who will be captain? Who will lead the team? I didn't have an answer. He shrugged and turned away. And I learned I could live with the disappointment of others. What I found in fencing, I continued in writing. A set of habits, a way of directing myself to the work had carried over. I had traded a father in Sebastiani for a mother, one martial art for another. Indians for many years had died by the gun, but we had died by the pen just as much. Rather than giving up one for the other, I felt I had found a way to knit both of these martial enterprises together. I practiced my basics. I worked on my form. I worked on my tempo. Of course, the moves themselves were different. Gone were thrusts and parries and fléchés. Instead, I practiced the writing of lilt, the growl, the cut, the surprise, the lullaby, the cry. I practiced surprise, and I practiced structure. Remember, David, Morrison told me once, sometimes novels proceed by way of plot in a simple sense. One action leads to another. But other kinds of novels proceed in other ways by a set of secret associations or images. You do that well, but you do not do plot well. That is something you will have to work on. I've been working on it. I'm still working on it. I'm working now, sitting by myself in my room at the time of the writing of this piece. In the midst of a divorce, I have children. I have now, as I didn't then, cares and concerns, and still Professor Morrison, then and now, is at my elbow, in my hand, in my head, and I'm still working, trying to drill the words. So thank you. Oh wait, there's more pages. I thought that was the end. It felt like the end. Let's make it the end. It's good. It's good. It's good.
Dave,
Sterling.
good questions for you.
Cool.
I'm looking at these questions. I don't know if you can handle them, man.
It's your question, isn't it?
They seem a little bit beyond you. I'm
No doubt.
sorry to, embarrass you like this, but
Ask the question, bro.
How did Native writers of the late 60s and 70s impact the politics of the era? What was the impact upon, sorry man, I've graduated to bifocals here, but I don't have bifocals, so. What was the impact upon the nation's consciousness via books like Housemaid of Dawn and even recent works gaining prominence today?
How did just sort of the stuff of the early Renaissance?
Yeah, I think like
Native
what
Renaissance?
was the cultural impact of those early like major Native works?
What was the broad cultural impact of, say, Housemaid of Dawn and
Yeah, I think like how did they
Winter in the Blood?
I mean the question is like how they impact the politics of the era, but I mean just go wherever you want to go with that, man, because I know that's what you're going to do anyway.
That's a really tough one to answer, right? Because like, how can I sort of with any kind of proof, right? Talk about what Housemaid of Dawn did and how that shaped people and their actions, or Winter in the Blood, or The Way to Rainy Mountain, or Ceremony, I can say how they affected me, in the 80s when I first came to them, and they affected me sort of profoundly, like, I mean, I never read Native Lit as a kid, I read fantasy lit. I read Piers Anthony and Terry Brooks, stuff like that, And it was actually my weird Belgian friend who was like, you should read this book, Ceremony, it's awesome, I'm like, okay. I'm like, wow. It was profound, but it was really, I don't know how my dad found it, but my dad found Tracks by Louise Erdrich, right? You all know. And my father didn't believe in the telephone. He didn't believe I should use the telephone, honestly. I'd call him from college really lonely. He's like, is it an emergency? I'm like, no. Stamps are cheaper. And he'd hang up. Right. But he called me, so I thought it was an emergency, and he called me. He's like, Dave, I read this book. It's called Tracks. It's amazing. You should read it. I'm like, okay. So I read it, and I was so moved. I was so blown away. I was physically unable, I couldn't leave my room. This would have been my sophomore year, because I remember the room. I didn't leave the room for 3 days. I couldn't even make it across this little courtyard to the freaking dining hall. All I could do was to sort of stop and reread it. Finish it and stop. Reread it. It, to me, was such a profound thing to see sort of, what felt like, to see and feel like art. It sounds stupid to put it this way, and I don't even have the words for my wonder or my appreciation to this day, but like, to have art happen and to have that world imagined, which was kind of like my world. To see sort of Ojibwe people, with this vast and intricate psychology and interiority, set loose, oftentimes to a bad end, right, in that book. I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen something that felt close to me before. So it had a profound impact on me, I don't know if I can say, what impact, a Ceremony had. For instance, like, I see Ceremony as a Vietnam novel. I see Ceremony as a Star Wars novel. I mean, Ceremony came out the same year as Star Wars. Remember that? 77? Right? Star Wars, like Ceremony, has a central character who's torn between the dark side, the light side, between evil and good. There's kind of a battle for his soul. Right? Am I talking nonsense here? Oh, right. Thank you. Yeah. And so, and I see that sort of Star Wars novel as well as Ceremony being very much about the sort of, about America's self-regard coming out of civil rights and the Vietnam War. That's just me. So that's why I think ceremony is American literature as much as it should be considered Native American literature, right? I mean, for that matter, I see much of Jim's stuff as modernist, in company with the great modernists of the 20th century. That's just me, Like, I read Mama Day and I hear echoes of both Emily Dickinson and Melville. So I don't know what impact they had. You're right, the question is beyond me, Sterling, 100%.
I know, but
You know what's really uncanny is that you're being a dick, but I can't see you. It's just this disembodied assholery coming out of like a monitor on stage.
see, this is the rest of your life, man.
This is the rest of this is your spiritual existence. Enjoy it.
Well, can you say more about, because I've talked about this, and obviously you've thought about it a lot, and you wrote about it in the Native American fiction, but this this idea of Native Lit and the way that it kind of separates our work from the rest of American and English literature in this very strange way that has never felt realistic to me. And can you just talk about that for the next 25 minutes? Just give people an idea of just your thoughts on that, because one, I think it's interesting, and two, I think it's something that strangely, even though that book came out 12 years ago,
I know, right?
That conversation is still relatively nascent in my mind. So
Yeah. Sterling, the disembodied spiritual Sterling. They have those T-shirts they say "spiritual gangster," They don't have T-shirts that say "spiritual asshole," I think
that they do. They except those shirts that say "Blackfeet."
I'm sorry for the cursing too. I know, but I just can't help it. Sterling brings it out of me. But the book that Sterling's talking about is this book that I ill-advisedly published in whatever year that was, 2006. The year I stopped sleeping. Not even joking. And I like to think of it as the book that launched 1,000 arguments, lots of hateful emails. But, in that book, as a professor, right, as a professor of Native American literature, among other things, I felt that this sort of scholarly literature around it was not very useful in explaining why our literature is so good and so vital and so interesting and complicated and excellent. Most of the scholarly literature and a lot of this sort of autobiographical truth-telling of a lot of our writers was sort of really only framed Native American literature as a sort of expression of some sort of essential nativeness, whether it's Pueblo storytelling or something else, And I thought that was a disservice to the literature, and not very helpful or useful to my students. So I'm like, okay, so what animates our work? Let me go on a search. What makes our work so interesting? Most of it, not all of it. And so it was for me, as a scholar or as sort of a literary investigator, I guess. And I tell my students this too, and my grad students also. I'm like, listen for echoes, don't look for origins. When you read this, what do you hear? What echoes do you hear? What does it remind you of? What's evoked for you? When I read Fool's Crow, I heard echoes of the Odyssey. I don't know if that was an inspiration of Jim's. I have no idea. But I felt the same kind of epic language, the same kind of repetitiveness of titles, swift-winged Athena, that kind of stuff you read in the Odyssey. I felt the same pulse in Fool's Crow, right? The same fully illuminated interior spaces, When I read Erdrich, I heard echoes of Flaubert. That's just me, and those are just my ears, but that's how it seemed to me. this sort of shifting subjectivities, of Flaubert's characters, reminded me of, I heard that in Erdrich, profoundly, So I think our literature is just factually so clearly, especially consider this, right? The majority of Native American literature, so-called, is literature written in English, mostly by monolingual English speakers. That's not a dig on anybody. That's not any kind of criticism of anybody at all. It's just a statement of sort of generative fact. And so a book's nearest relatives aren't the hopes and wishes and dreams or identity of its writer. A book's nearest relatives are always other books. Every book has a massive amount of cousins, if not ancestors, right? And the cousins of Native literature seem so clearly to me, also American literature, also world literature in English. I think of that as a strength of Native American literature. I think of what we've done with English, Not all of us, of course. Some of us do write in our tribal languages. I do not. And I think it's both factual, but it's also, for me, liberating to recognize that sort of my book is responsive to sort of, a broad, deep tradition, of arts and letters. I mean, I think our literature is the best American literature, really do, these days. Just like Irish literature is the best of English literature. And that's factual, right? And now, sort of like African and subcontinental British literature is the best of English literature. They're doing things with language that is just incredible. It's absolutely incredible. So, I don't know. Yeah, we're the best. Not sorry.
I think I was actually having a conversation last night about this, and I guess I had never really, it's something I thought about, but I'd never thought about out loud or in a broader sense. But I was talking with Lois and Louise last night, and it's not only that we are sort of denied the conversation of influence, in terms of being influenced by non-native writers, but also we're also denied the conversation about how we influence non-native writers. It wasn't until I read, after I read Winter in the Blood the first time, that I could not stop, in particular, thinking about Carver's work. And because Carver comes after Jim's first, and there's such a strong link stylistically and I think tonally, atmospherically between Winter in the Blood and Carver's body of work that I can't separate them. I've never ever in my life heard a conversation about how any native book has ever influenced a non-native writer's work, right? And it sucks because we're just sort of being continuously pushed into this space where it's only us and we don't belong to anything else and we're all by ourselves and we're just there we are.
But But I think you're right, but I think it's also wrong, right? I think we've had profound...
I've never been wrong, Dave.
Well,
Yeah.
Your family's here, right? Right?
My mom is here, be nice.
I think it would be pretty easy to show, for example, the profound influence that Louise has had on contemporary American fiction since 1984, I don't think you can read a host of things. What's coming to mind right now, and I'm tired, so I can't think of a bunch of titles right now, but Jennifer Egan, Visit from the Goon Squad, among other things. There's so much. Jeanette Winterson, I don't think you can read Annie Proulx. I think all of these writers I hear echoes of Louise in them, clearly, you know. Mama Day is a different beast. I'm not quite sure. He was such an arch sort of modernist. It's so weird, man. I mean, it's just it's such a weird book. Just think of that albino like slapping Abel with that chicken. It's a great scene, it's really great. But I think when we position ourselves as sort of outside of American literature, I think we deprive ourselves of the chance to see the kind of influence we've had, I mean, Welch has had profound effects, and, some of them are very local too, right? I mean, think of all the Montana writers, I think of Elwood Reed. I think of Walter Kern to some degree. I think of Kevin Canty. I'm trying to think of other folks. But, and those of us in the room, right? So I just think we're just not used to seeing it, but I think we've had a profound influence on American letters. Definitely. Good question. Hope that wasn't yours, Sterling.
That was definitely my question. All the good ones are mine, Dave.
Disappointing.
Okay, last one.
Last one.
From a deeply insecure fellow.
What? No, I couldn't. I really couldn't hear you.
From a deeply insecure fellow. In what ways have you used your, quote, insecurities as a tool?
As a tool.
I mean, first of all, you have to admit you have insecurities, Dave. So
Do I?
I know this is hard.
Well, I don't know. I mean, until, I guess, relatively recently, I guess until 2012, I just hid behind my prose. I just wrote fiction, And since I've since shifted into nonfiction, and I shifted into nonfiction kind of out of emotional necessity. And by the way, I'm still writing fiction. Don't worry, there will be a book to walk by very soon.
To what?
And, and I had a crisis, after the school shooting at Red Lake, honestly, and after my grandfather's death by suicide, both of which happened like pretty close together. That sort of informed and shaped and sort of drove me into res life and made it what it was. And the question was like, what else is there, right? To reservations, what else is there other than suffering? I know there's more than that, but I can't see more than that, I need to see more than that. I need to believe there's more than just our pain, right? And so that kind of pushed me into nonfiction, and that's pushed me into sort of, I don't know, into writing personal essays like this one, which is, I guess, on the lighter end of things to a point, but into sort of heavier stuff, like the one that came out a couple weeks ago in the New York Times about sort of my parents. And before that, sort of the piece about grief. There's a kind of, I don't know. I'm like the Oogie Boogie Man, but just insecurities, right? From like The Nightmare Before Christmas. They remove the wrappings as bugs. Have you seen that movie? No one's saying anything. You've seen the movie. I know you've seen the movie. But it's just like problems, right? For me. And I don't know if I write personal essays and write nonfiction as a way of sorting out or working through my insecurities. I really don't think so. But those are certainly part of the drama, And they're part of the drama of some of the nonfiction I do because, the crisis is the question so often in my nonfiction. But writing is not therapeutic for me, I'm in therapy, right? And she's like, I think you should write. I'm like, I think that's the worst idea you've ever had. Absolutely, I refuse that treatment, ma'am. And pick something else, I would do like tap dance before I did, no way. And so I really don't think I don't think it's a place for me to work out my issues. But my issues are part of sort of what I'm trying to see, you know? Like, for instance, like in Res Life. So my life and many of the questions that inform that book kicked off in the wake of my grandfather's suicide. Trigger warning, but he shot himself in the head. And I rushed home and showed up at my grandmother's trailer, which is nearby my grandfather's house. It's a whole different story. And she asked me to do two things. She asked me to write his eulogy, and she asked me, I remember so clearly, she said, like, yeah, go up there and, you know, I want you to go up to the big house and clean up what he did. I want you to take anything out that has anything, in the way she put it, has anything on it. She's like, so, like anything, like the carpet, anything, take it out. So I stripped his room down to the subfloor because it was on everything, you know? And so like I'm writing about this and I'm like, why would she ask me? I remember what she said. She goes, well, you know, I can't ask your uncles to go up there. They can't see that. And I remember thinking, what makes you think I can see that? I mean, honestly, what makes you think I can see that? And the answer was unflattering, right? The answer was, she didn't think I was close with him, or she didn't think I mattered very much. They can't see that. But Dave, fuck it, you know? So when it came time to write that part of the book, you know, I could have written something untrue, right? I could have written something like, my grandmother asked me to do this hard work because I can do those things. You know, something that sort of puffed myself up, but that would be dishonest, right? And the drama of a lot of nonfiction is honesty, I suppose. What's more honest to say is that she didn't think I mattered that much. So I said some version of that, because it was true. So I don't know what this has to do with insecurities, you know, honestly. And it's a very low note on which to end this otherwise delightful gathering, you know? Except to say don't grow up to be writers. Oh yeah, and my mom, yeah, no, I won't tell that story. I won't do it. But is that really the last question? Can we just do one more that's a little more fun, Sterling? I'm looking at the speaker like it's you, but to me it is you. Oh, you lost the, sorry, man. Yeah, we can't end on that note. Sorry, it's just not. I know you have places to be, but.
Your fault, man.
It's your fault.
I didn't ask you.
The long intro, bro.
Okay, here's a very simple one. What steps can new writers take to connect with seasoned writers for mentorship?
Gosh, I don't know. Right place, right time? No, but I mean, it's really so much that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's just, yeah, there's no good answer, right? I mean, you go to the places, you do the things, you make the connections, you know, you see if you vibe, right? Morrison had to teach me initially because I was in the class that she had to teach. And I think that she must have liked something she saw. She offered to be my thesis advisor, you know? And I got lucky. She saw something maybe, or maybe she was bored and like, this is amusing, I don't know. No, I mean, I have no idea because like, I don't know what she thought because I never asked her what she thought about that. I never asked her why, you know? And I feel like it's not fair. This is a nonfiction practice, right? In the nonfiction I write, I never talk about someone's state of mind unless they've told me what their state of mind was. Otherwise, I'm just making stuff up. So I don't know. You know, maybe she was bored. Maybe she had to pick a student, although she didn't have to do that. I know for a fact she could pick none if she wanted. So how to do it, I don't know, but I say go to the things. Talk to people. If you're lucky, and I got lucky, you just find someone, I feel the same way about other endeavors, right? Like, I was lucky that I found a guy who taught me to trap and to live in the bush, as they say in Canada. Like, I was really into that stuff. I really wanted to do it, and I was really curious about it, and he's passed away now. He became my best friend, my brother, my uncle, He's like, hey, so you're gonna be in Canada doing some work on your dissertation? I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, fuck that. You wanna learn how to trap? And I was like, hell yeah. So I'd lived with him on his trap line for a year, and ate lots of pork chops. So I don't know, like, it is right place, right time. It's just, But also, like, and this is the thing too, like, might be a better answer. It's like, I was sort of the kind of reader who liked inhabiting the writers that, not in a gross way, that I was reading. So I was in Toni Morrison's office, and there's this book, it was a really beautiful cover, on her desk. And she held it up. She's like, you see this? She's like, this is as close to perfect as a novel can get. And I'm like, okay. Probably should read that then. And so I read All the Pretty Horses. And then I'm like, oh my God. I'd never even heard of him before, Cormac McCarthy. Then I read The Crossing, and then I read Suttree, then I read Child of God, then I read Orchard Keeper, then I read Outer Dark, and then I read Blood Meridian, and then No Country for Old Men, and then, and then The Road, his worst. And so, it is his worst. It's terrible. I was in love, and so I'm like, the books are a way of being mentored. Like, how do they do that? How does this work? And how do they pull this off? You make a study of them, right? So in lieu of humans and human connection, for me, like, everyone I read, I'm trying to pick up, like, to figure out, solve puzzles. Like, how do they do that, and how could I do that? And if I did that, how would it be different? This was true for Cormac McCarthy. It was true for me, at least. These were my people. Peter Carey. This was true for Michael Ondaatje. That wore off, though, a little bit. And it was true for Erdrich. It was true for Morrison. I just read everything. I'm like, how do they do that? And how do they do this? And, like, can I do that in my own way? Or what would it, just like these books, not the people, but the books, were my guide for so much, More profoundly probably even than Morrison herself, let's be honest. I was only her student, for a couple of years. And then sort of the guy who brought her, like, terrible things, like bad Chinese food and vodka, for many decades after that. But, like, yeah, the books, man, always the books. We always have them, So on that note, let's end. Thank you so much.